In 2011, the US government made a bold legal declaration. Pizza is a vegetable. Now, we all know the truth. Pizza is glorious melted cheese with tomato sauce on a doughy base. Congress, they passed a law saying that pizza, so long as it had at least 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, is a vegetable and therefore met the healthy lunch requirements of American children. So how did this happen? Well, the frozen pizza industry sent a small army of lobbyists, I assume, to Washington, D.C. to talk to lawmakers and make it so, because they knew pizza is whatever lawmakers say it is. And that's the strange truth about the law. The definitions call all the shots. My claim today is quite simple. Almost every living thing on the planet is legally misclassified. And unlike pizza as a vegetable, which is hilarious, the legal misclassification of nature causes countless animal suffering and an ecological crisis. Now, I know this has gone from zany vegetable comedy to existential eco-drama very fast, so please let me explain with an example the octopus. Under US law, the octopus is not an animal. Seriously. The US Animal Welfare Act defines the word animal, which means the species that it is protecting through this law, and you scroll down and look at the definition of animal, and it says, does not include invertebrates, species without a backbone. So legally, invertebrates are not animals under the law meant to protect them. So an octopus is invisible in the eyes of this law, including in laboratory settings where they are tested on regularly in horrific conditions with nobody to help them. And this is the octopus we're talking about, the octopus. They can solve puzzles, they can recognize human faces, they can even open a jar from the inside. Their tentacles can feel and taste. They even essentially have brains of their own. They are magical, incredible creatures, but in the eyes of US law, not an animal when it comes to basic dignity. The next example is my favorite, meaning the most horrifying. Under the US Clean Water Act, they interpret the word water to include only navigable waters, meaning those you can bring a ship down, you can navigate on it. And they exclude countless wetlands and streams and groundwater. They are not water, because we all know if you can't take a steamboat down a little creek, there's zero reason to protect it whatsoever. This brings up a darker question. If an octopus is not an animal, and a stream is not a water, what are they? And the answer is they are property. They are legally a thing. And it's not just them, it's really all of nature. Every forest, every river, every mountain, they have no rights, no voice, and no seat at the table. And we've been through this before. There have been entire categories of humans that were once the property of other humans. It was horrific. We've changed the laws. Those scars still remain. And now it is time for nature to go through a similar transformation. I learned what this means through the ocean. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest along the Salish Sea. I had wonderful parents, and I remember my dad took me on a trip through British Columbia in the Inside Passage on a little outboard motorboat all the way to this beautiful, beautiful fjord. Imagine this, 2,000-foot granite cliffs and distant waterfalls like thin white threads on the mountains. I remember the water was just teeming with life. I remember looking into water and seeing forests of bull kelp and bright orange starfish and shiny schools of herring darting all around it all. And the ocean had this rhythm to it. And we were on the way home, and there was a splash. And my heart's pounding really fast. We cut the engine. And it sounds like, or feels like, that the whole ocean is holding its breath. And then I hear the most magical sound in the universe. A blowhole as a pod of orcas rise to the surface and dive right under our boat. And I remember this whole trip, just this feeling of magic, of awe at the ocean. And it was years later that I really, really realized what it was. And it is the understanding or feeling that the ocean in its entirety collectively is alive. It is a living entity. And I'm not the first person to think of that. There are cultures all around the world that know the ocean is alive. Many believe the ocean is a relative or kin. To some, it is a god. But the law believes none of that. I went to law school years later to protect the ecosystems and species I cared so much about, only to learn that the orca, the ocean, these are treated as property under the law. The sacred ocean is not seen from a legal perspective. Instead of being sacred, the ocean is maximum sustainable yield and fish stocks and exclusive economic zones. There is no life in the law. To underscore this, I want to tell you about one more story, a particular orca. In 1970, a bunch of men in speedboats, bros with boats, were going around near Seattle, rounding up baby orcas with explosives and with nets, capturing them and sending them across the world. Lovely. And one particular orca was a 4-year-old female. She was taken, brought all the way over to Miami, put into a tiny tank, and forced to perform in the hot sun for 53 years. Her name was Lolita. From a legal perspective, what was she? She was $20,000 of property. But to the indigenous people who came from her same waters, the Lummi, she was much more. She was a relative. They called orcas Cathelmachin, or relatives under the waves. And they, for generations, had a relationship of kinship with these orcas. There was a coalition of Lummi elders and their partners that worked to bring home Lolita, who they named in their indigenous language, Skallichuctanut, to her home waters. And I had the honor of being their lawyer for some time. And along the way, there were many debates about what's in the best interest of Skallichuctanut. Some people said it's too dangerous to bring her home, no way. And what I kept asking is, if there's a human who can't speak for themselves, and there are tough decisions that have to be made, who makes those decisions? Is it the institution that bills them? No. Is it a stranger? Certainly not. It is their family. You make decisions for your family. So why here, and here she is, why here was it that Skallichuctanut's corporate captor was the one making the final decisions instead of the indigenous Lummi who had loved orcas for thousands of years? And it is because under the law, property doesn't have family, it has an owner. A deal was finally made, but it was too late, and Skallichuctanut died in this tank. She never got home to see the ocean from which she came. And this really shows that definitions dictate destiny when it comes to the law. So I talked about myself, I talked about the Lummi. I want to ask you, what does nature mean to you? What does a forest mean to you? Is it sacred, a source of life, a refuge? Is it your home? And then you ask what it means to the law. And the words you see are timber, biomass, natural resource. We know this is not true. No one looks at an old growth forest and says, oh, beautiful board feet there. No one looks at an octopus in a jar like a total sicko and says, oh, nice non-animal in that jar there. The point I want to make here is that there is an enormous, enormous gap between what the law says nature is and what we know it to be from our science, in our hearts, and from our oldest cultures. So what if the law caught up? You know what's coming next. It already is happening. There's a whole movement of laws around the world to align our human laws with the laws of nature. I call this field Earth law or Earth-centered law, and the goal of it is to give nature rights, a voice, a seat at the table, and it is spreading all over the world. The most prominent movement in this space might be the rights of nature, the idea that nature has rights just as humans do, or just as corporations do. This was first recognized in Ecuador in 2008 in its constitution, and ever since then, cloud forests and Galapagos ecosystems have been fighting for their rights in the courts, rights to health, right to regeneration, and they are winning. Now, without getting into a big law lecture, simply put, the difference is that under our current laws, we permit industry to extract until an ecosystem nears collapse. That's the status quo. Under rights of nature, we respectfully take from nature while upholding the integrity of the entire system. That's it in a nutshell. Another example is just a few years ago in the Peruvian Amazon, there are indigenous Kukama women who have long believed the Marañón River to be alive, a living entity, and in fact, their ancestors' souls live in the water. After decades of oil spills, they brought a lawsuit. Our team at Earth Law Center helped them, and they won a landmark judgment declaring this river to be a living being with rights. And additionally, they are to be appointed as the legal guardians of the river, giving it a formal voice in law. Even our friends, the southern resident orcas, are beginning to earn rights through local resolutions in the Pacific Northwest, and Lummi elders are now leading a new stage of indigenous laws to respect their family members in the law as such. So these movements are happening all over the world. There are many others. There's the criminalization of ecocide, which criminalizes the widespread destruction of nature. And this means that no one can harm the planet to such an extent without culpability. And there are even efforts to give nature its own board seats in companies so that we can transform companies from the inside. And nature always has a voice and a vote in the room. And lawyers are doing all this. And I've had the great privilege of working in this space for about 15 years, advising governments and companies and frontline activists about legal innovations to put nature into the core of our legal systems and our governance. But the thing I'm really most proud of is that I've trained over 1,000 individuals to do the same work that I do. So there's this whole new generation of people standing up and going into courts and legislatures and parliaments and saying, I am the coral reef and I'm here to give it a voice. Or saying, this forest has rights and we must enforce them in today's decision. It is what I see as the beginning of a rewilding of the entire legal system. When we change the law, we change what society values and honors. And maybe one day an octopus can be an octopus, a creek can be a creek, an orca can be family, and nature can be, legally speaking, what we all know it to be, which is an interdependent community of life of which we are one small part. We can transform the law so that it reflects our morals, our hearts, our science, and harmonizes with the sacredness of the living earth. Thank you.